Okay, so by this point you will have pretty much mapped out most of the proportions of the face by now. So then what you want to do just before moving on is you want to make sure that you are making some necessary and minor adjustments to the drawing. So just study your reference and just try to make sure that all of the pieces are lining up. So, if I have a look at my reference, I can see if I was to draw a line from inside the eye, for example, to the edge of the nose, it's kind of leaning, that vertical line is slightly tilted, right? So I have to do the same on my drawing. It's a slight tilt. So the edge of the nose would actually be located about there. Which means then that I have to adjust a few things on the nose here. That would come in like that. And, as always, just take your time, just use short lines, dash lines. Don't get carried away with detail at this point in the drawing. Okay, so now that I've drawn the base of the nose, I'm just going to kind of define the front plane, which rests about there. Okay. I'm just kind of defining some of those shadow shapes that are crossing through the hair. And this is a really tricky part of the drawing because there's a lot of hair curls and they're pretty abstract shapes as well. So it's very difficult to kind of keep on top of them all. But again, having a look at the reference, you can see there's a bit of a zigzag pattern in the hair. And just map out the parts that you can see. Don't worry about going into detail. There's also like a strap that runs around her hair. So you also want to make sure that you draw that, and that strap kind of cuts through the middle of her hair, which I'm drawing now, just kind of lightly stroking that in with the pencil. It's quite a narrow strap as well. And then it travels to the front of her head, just above the top of the forehead. It's pretty much where it ends. And again, at this stage, I'm still using broken lines. where that strap kind of tucks in, that's where the hair sort of folds out there, so it creates a bit of a bump. And then a bit of a bump on the other side as well. Now I'm just kind of redefining the silhouette of the hair on the outside, since that's going to help me to draw the details of the hair a little bit better. So I'm not rushing to shade the drawing in just yet. The tone will come later. I still need to keep mapping out all of the other proportions that are running around the head. Running around the head, that doesn't make sense. Can find the right words there. Anyway. And again, just staying true to that philosophy of working from large to small. Okay. I need to shut that window because that rain is getting really loud. So right now we're in the stage of adjusting all of the proportions in our drawing, and it's really crucial that we do it now, because if we skip ahead and start doing all of the details and all of the shading, then, you know, if there are any big mistakes in the drawing, then we're just not going to be able to correct them. So it's really important that we get this part correct. And just try to ignore all the shadow shapes for now. We are going to draw those in. But right now we're just focusing on the planes of the face. And basically just modeling the face before we start drawing any kind of shadow shapes or anything like that. We don't really want to rush ahead into those, because if we can establish some of the main features of the face, then those sorts of things are going to be much easier to define. Okay, so there's the eyelid there. Just kind of sketching in the ball of the eye. I'm just sort of lightly sketching in a sphere when I'm drawing the eye, because if you go ahead and do that, if you just draw that little curve, it's a bit easier to draw the eyelid that wraps around it. And the eyelid wraps around the eyeball. And it kind of wants to come down there. I'm just lightly sketching in the bottom eyelid since I don't quite know the exact placement of that just yet. That looks correct, but it might need a little bit of adjustment. So there's the front edge of the nose there, where it turns into shadow. There's the round of the nose just under it, which then travels up to meet the nostril up there. Let's go ahead and just draw that curvature of the eyebrow. So it kind of meets near the top of the eyelid there. And then it tucks into that corner where the eyebrow meets the side of the nose, which then creates that kind of shadow shape that does that. Going to redraw this eyelid at the bottom, since I think that could be drawn a little bit better. In the reference, it looks a little bit wider, so that's kind of what I want to achieve. So don't get too attached to the things that you draw. If you do spot a mistake, just correct it and move on. I think I'm very happy happy with that. And just make sure you're double checking all of your measurements, making sure that they're all falling into place. Okay. Lighten up. Okay, so let's start drawing the hair again. Sometimes it helps to just move away from the face and just focus on a different area. Kind of helps the drawing go a little bit faster too. So Aphrodite actually has two straps wrapping around her head. So this is the second one that I'm drawing in now. It's not as obvious, it's quite narrow from this angle, but it is there. So you want to make sure that you draw it in there. Or at least just sketch it in very lightly. Okay. So once you've got the contours of the head sort of mapped out, that's when you can start drawing the details of the hair with a little bit more confidence. But again, you're still using broken lines to sketch them in place. You don't really want to commit to any kind of shape at this point. At this point of the drawing stage. Just keep those lines nice and broken, nice and short. And 5 minutes later it starts raining again. Brisbane weather for you. Okay. Bit of a shape there that kind of protrudes out. So I like to spend my time in the line stage of the portrait drawing for quite a while actually. You can see how far I'm taking this. I'm not tempted to sound like thunder. I'm not tempted to start shading anytime soon. I mean, I could start shading the drawing now and probably end up with a really nice result, but I find the longer I spend in the line phase, the better the drawing looks, because it gives me time to really explore the different plane changes and just kind of construct the drawing as accurately as I can. And it also improves my own understanding of the human form as well every time I draw like this. So now I'm just kind of coming back to the mouth, just kind of drawing that part of the muscle just under the bottom lip there, where it inserts into the chin. It's not very obvious on the reference, but again, it is there on the human body, so you have to draw it. But just make sure you draw it really lightly. You don't have to make it too dark, but just make sure you are drawing stuff like that, because especially when you start toning the figure, things like that really help you. It's all about exploring the different plane changes. So there's that part of the mouth there. Again, just keeping that a bit on the lighter side. Cheekbone there. Bit of hair there. So just keep jumping all over around the drawing. Just do not get tunnel visioned into any specific part. Gradually working your way to the smaller details. Okay, so I think at this point, this drawing is pretty much well constructed. I'm just going to define where that eyebrow inserts into the forehead, about there, since that's going to help me. But that line drawing is pretty well constructed at this point. Everything looks like it's in proportion. It's not perfect, but that's not really the point of drawing constructively. You know, perfection isn't really the goal. The goal is to try to construct all the different planes of the human head and to broaden your knowledge of human anatomy. That's the goal. If you're just doing like a one-to-one copy of the reference, then that's not really beneficial to your art practice, since you're going to be relying on copying too much. So from this point, I would say it would be a good idea to start drawing in some of those smaller shadow shapes. Maybe refining that shadow shape on the side plane of the face. I could do with a little bit of a tweak, I think. Okay, so now I'm going to start drawing in all of those smaller shadow shapes on the figure. So I'm just going to smooth this one out here. Draw that shadow on the nose, which sits under there. And then it kind of drops into the top lip there. So when you're drawing these cast shadows, try to mark them with quite dark lines in order to separate them from the rest of the line work. And in that way the drawing just becomes, or the structure of the drawing, I should say, becomes a bit more visible and just a little bit easier to understand. There's the cast shadow from the bottom lip there, and it hits the top of the chin there, and then it sort of curves around the figure. So it's that little accent that you want to pay attention to there. And we've also got that shadow being cast from the top lip onto the bottom lip right there in the corner of the mouth. And that kind of wraps around the bottom lip like so. So that's looking pretty good. Here's the shadow of the head falling onto the neck. So we can just quickly just draw that in. It's a pretty simple shape. Doesn't have to be perfect. Just like that. And then the hard part is drawing all the cast shadows for all of these different hair curls. So I'm going to show you how to do that in the next video. Okay, so what we want to do now is we want to start finalizing stage 2 of the drawing process. So we've kind of got the proportions of the face mapped out. We've drawn some of these shadow shapes, some of the cast shadow of the nose. Still need to draw that shadow of the eye actually, so let's go ahead and do that now. So that cast shadow of the eye, it kind of, again, it wraps around the form of the eyeball, so you're drawing more of a curved form right there. And as always, just sketch it in lightly. You can also see that sort of lip of the lower eyelid where it curls into the eyeball. I'm just very lightly sketching that in, but it's important that we do draw that in. so that we can then draw the cast shadow onto it, because that lip kind of protrudes out a little bit more, so then that shadow, it curls around the eyeball and then it bumps up as it curls over the eyelid like that. And in this lower portion of the eyelid, that all turns into shadow. So you want to make sure you're paying attention to these shadow shapes, because they're giving you clues as to what those forms are doing. They're actually showing you the different plane changes of the sculpture. And then that cast shadow is being cast onto the face a little bit, so it wraps around here, there, and then there's a slight bump in our reference. That's the shadow of the top eyelid being cast right next to the bottom eyelid right there. So we're just carefully sketching that in. So I'm just kind of refining the details on the face a little bit more before I start moving into the hair. And during this stage, you want to make sure that your line work is pretty clean. So take the eraser and just clean up some of those lines. And then this form here is casting a slight shadow right next to that top eyelid like that. Can you see that slightly darker part? Does something a little bit like that. Now I'm just going to refine that shape there a little more. So again, when we draw constructively, we spend a lot of time on the line work, because the more time we spend in this stage, then the easier it's going to be trying to shade all of these different forms in. I'm going to sketch the ear a little bit. And then there's the inside of the ear there. Just going to mark that with a dashed line. And then I'll come back to that form a little bit later on. Maybe we can make that a little more three-dimensional. Just still using nice, light, soft lines. Okay, so let's have a look at the forms of the hair. So if you're drawing things like this, because this is quite difficult, the hair is a little bit more, I guess you could say it's a little bit more abstract looking. There's a lot of detail in the hair. It's very difficult to, it's very difficult to keep on top of all those details. So I don't really want you to copy it one for one from the reference, but what I want you to do is to kind of understand the structure and the direction of the hair. You'll notice I've kind of sketched in a few soft lines already, and the hair kind of goes in like a bit of a zigzag pattern, and then it wraps around the head. The hair strands go from the front of the hairline and then sort of wrap around to the bun at the back. And that's what you need to understand about the structure. So long as you have those forms wrapping around and you get those zigzag forms in there, it doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to look exactly like the reference, but so long as that structure is in there, it's going to look good. So it's all about understanding the structure of things, not necessarily copying them one to one. I think to draw every single detail of the hair is, first of all, it's really time consuming. Second of all, it's not really all that necessary either. But the process is always the same. You're jumping around, you're just drawing in the parts you can see, and then you just slowly and gradually work your way to some of those smaller parts. Because remember, the larger forms will reveal the smaller forms. So just draw the parts you can see, and don't worry too much about being a perfectionist. Just using a lot of broken lines right now. Don't want to commit to anything at this point. So you can see, like earlier I drew these kind of sweeping lines, and now I'm breaking it up with these more jagged lines here. So I'm just kind of refining those shapes that I've already got in there. But those large sweeping lines keep everything in proportion, and they keep that structure apparent. So, I can do it on this part of the hair here. Just start with a general direction of where that might be going. Kind of tucks in there. And then I can break that shape up by putting in some of those more jagged parts of the hair like that. And still using those broken dashed lines. But yeah, I think drawing hair is, it is very tricky, and I think it is just, really it's just practice, to be honest. I don't really think it ever gets easy. There's just a lot to keep on top of, which is very difficult. But I'm not too worried about being a perfectionist about it either. I'm just drawing what I think looks correct, or what I think looks good. So then I draw that, and then I move to a different area. So I could go into this part now. That kind of does that. There's that direction. And then I can do that there. Okay. work out some of these forms behind the ear now. So there's one that's kind of going in a direction like that, and then there's another below it. So you notice how all these hair strands, these ones tend to go up and over the head towards the bun, and as it moves past below the ear, they tend to go in the other direction. They kind of go this way. And that's how you want to be drawing it, because that's how you're going to get a much more, or just a much better look. It's going to make that hair look more spherical. So it kind of goes like that, sort of flattens off in the middle, and then it goes like that. And that's how you get that really round form. And that's the thing, a lot of people think a drawing doesn't look three-dimensional until you start shading it in. But I disagree. I think a linear drawing actually describes the forms really well, so long as your line quality is really good and that you have a clear understanding of what those forms are doing. I think a lot of artists, they tend to, especially the ones who were trained with like barg plates and things like that, I think they over-rely on shading a little bit too much. And shading is a powerful tool, but I was really happy when I switched to linear drawing like this, because I just found that it improved my understanding of three-dimensional form. And I didn't even have to draw from life half the time. I think life drawing is really good practice, but that alone won't really make you a better artist as such, or not when it comes to perspective drawing anyway. Perspective drawing is all about understanding the three-dimensional structure of whatever it is you're drawing, and you can apply that to portraiture. And I find that the barg plates didn't really help me do that. All the barg plates did was just make me rely on copying a bit too much, rather than actually understanding. When I was drawing with barg plates, I was very good at drawing what I could see. I was very good at copying, but I wasn't very good at drawing from imagination, because barg plates don't teach you to draw from imagination. But maybe that's just a topic for another video, I don't know. So you can see I've kind of drawn this line on the back of the hair bun, right? And this is kind of what I want you to understand, is that when I place a line on the page, I don't do it for no reason. This is one plane of the bun of the hair, and then this is another plane. And I know that that's another plane because if you have a look at the reference, there's a bunch of reflected light hitting the hair in this area. So that's a plane change. That's letting you know that the form is now turning. And that's why I've represented that with a line. And that, again, that's going to help me when it comes to shading in this drawing and getting a better result from it. That line is not visible in the reference. That's just my own understanding of the form, okay? So this is what I'm talking about. I'm not just drawing the things I can see. I'm also drawing the things that I interpret the form as, or it's my interpretation of the construction of the form. Like this part here where the cylinder of the neck inserts into the shoulders. You can see that that shadow here is slightly darker than this one here. So there's a bunch of reflected light here, and then it gets darker as soon as it meets that point. And I'm drawing this in. It's not that obvious in the reference. I mean, you can see it, but it's not as well defined as I've made it. But I'm still drawing it because I know it's important. But I'm using soft lines. Like you'll notice that I change the line quality all the time. So any kind of like soft transitions like that, I draw the line in, but I make sure that the line is nice and soft. And anything like a clear cast shadow, like this one on the neck, you can see how the line is much sharper. It's way sharper than that one. So by prioritizing the lines, you know, I'm giving them different meanings from each other. And that also helps me to shade this thing in when the time comes to shade it in. So like that's a cast shadow there. I'm really going to darken that because I know it's going to be dark anyway. So different lines have different meanings. So make sure you're using a combination of soft fuzzy lines and sharp lines. So there's a bit of reflected light on the back of the head here. And I'm not going to attempt to draw all of those details, but I will draw a soft line like that. And I'm just kind of trying to figure out the general shape of that reflected light. Kind of travels that way, and then it travels there. But again, just soft lines. And then that way, I know exactly what's going on there. Okay. Okay, continuing on. So don't be afraid to just go over some of your previous line work just to correct things as you need to. That's why I like to use really soft lines as I'm sketching the figure in, just so that way it's a bit easier to correct them a bit later on in the drawing. So now I'm just trying to locate some of those shadow shapes. lighten up some of that line work there. So it's basically just this process at this point. So you get your big shapes in, then you start trying to break them up with the jagged lines, and then you start going into shadow shapes and finding in some of the details. So I'm going to kind of speed through this part because this is a time-consuming part, getting all of those details of the hair in there. But at this point, you'll kind of know the process. So I'm going to finish off this stage, and then we'll come back for the next stage, which is basically applying the first tones onto the figure.